The life cycles of devices is very, very long. So it creates a magnitude of a challenge to those customers when they are looking into the overall attack surface. I wouldn't say that computers and people are negligent, but the attack surface is broadening beyond just the managed devices.
Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts Jesse Meadors and Ramin Lemay, where we discuss the latest cutting-edge technologies and how they are affecting the security industry. Join us as we explore the latest advancements and discuss how these innovations are shaping the future of security.
We're back for Securing the Future podcast. I am your host, Jesse Meadors, and as usual, my trusty co-host, Ramin Lemay.
What's up, guys?
And today we are going to be discussing kind of part two. We've talked about OT in the past, but in this episode, we've got a special guest, Liran Chen. Liran actually comes from 25 plus years in cybersecurity. He's been leading systems engineering teams, kind of focusing on a variety of critical infrastructure, as well as kind of IoT, OT environments. Very knowledgeable as an executive in the industry, and is going to talk to us a lot about the threat landscape and how things are evolving in the area of critical infrastructure, the area of kind of OT systems. And we're talking like healthcare, finance, critical infrastructure, you name it. So really going to take a broader look at the areas of threat to consider as a security leader, being aware of the types of attacks, the methods, and also we'll also of course touch on, which we have to, AI, because everybody talks about it, right? But we'll talk about if there is use cases that are evolving to be able to help improve folks that work in those industries to be able to mitigate these types of attacks. So, Liran, we're really excited to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Great. Well, why don't you kick us off with a little bit of some statistics that you shared with us earlier when we were prepping that were really staggering about kind of how we've evolved in utilization of IoT and maybe kind of set the foundation of the threat landscape.
Yes. So in the last about 7 to 8 years, I started to focus on what we call the unmanaged devices, things that you cannot put an agent on them, most likely do not run an operating system. And when you look into that, and there are XIoT or IoT, OT, IOMT for medical, IoT for all the nice things that you have, your car, your dishwasher, your refrigerator. So when you look into the population, just for the sheer volume of population, it's pretty interesting in terms of threat and attack surface, right? So if you have 7 billion people in the world, you have about 2 billion servers, maybe, that has an operating system, and it's growing tremendously, maybe 3 billion, 4 billion. But when you look in the number of IoTs, this family of devices that are surrounding you every day, everywhere you go, we are talking about 24 billion devices. And in the next 5 to 6 years, you're going to see the 30 billion devices. So It's quite large. And with that comes another challenge that you may not take into consideration, which is when you have an attack or a threat against a computer or an operating system, you may have a layer 8 problem, which is the human being clicking on the wrong link. All of us are at fault. But on the other hand, there is a vulnerability and a patch supplied by the 5 big guys, like if it's Oracle, Apple, Microsoft, Linux, IBM, Red Hat, all those guys, they're thousands and tens of thousands of people that would give you the fix that you need. In the IoT space, which when you look into those devices, they have a firmware that 95% of its components are open source, outdated. And what do you do with that? Do you replace that device? Or if you just bought a new MRI machine that came with an XP or Windows 7, and if you are lucky, Windows 10. But when you try to patch it, it's not as simple to patch it. Or if it's a regulator in a substation in your utility company, how do you protect that? That is 10 or 15 or 20 years old. The life cycles of devices is very, very long. So it creates a magnitude of a challenge to those customers when they are looking into the overall attack surface, I wouldn't say that computers and people are negligent, but the attack surface is broadening beyond just the managed devices.
And just so that I always like to understand, I like to give like practical examples, right? Like, you mentioned that many devices. Think about how many of those devices are in your own house, and when was the last time you updated any of those devices or checked on them? Like,
Right.
I have a treadmill that we bought like 4 years ago. I couldn't tell you if it's powered on. I couldn't tell you if it's still on the network, right? Those are the examples where, from an attack surface, it becomes scary for consumers, right? Not only companies, but even consumers, right? Because that treadmill could be, a way a bad actor is already on my network, could be listening to my traffic, potentially, watching me log on to my bank account and other things that are more scary. But, these IoT devices, we plug them up, we set them up, we forget about them, right? They're really, good ways to be able to target an organization.
Yeah, but Ramin, you took it again to the IP world, which is, I totally agree with this threat about your banking account and all that good stuff. But think about safety. The big brother, if you have Ring, I have Ring and Blink. If somebody has access to it, he has access to your life to see what you're doing, how you're doing, what you're doing. Or, for example, we mentioned about if you are in a hospital and all of your EPA information can be exposed to the internet, all of your health situation, going through a surgery, all that good stuff can be something that can be valuable to those threat actors.
Wow. One thought I had, Laurent, I mean, obviously you've got a problem here with a couple things, right? You mentioned outdated devices that just can't be patched, right? Their firmware can't be updated. But then you all have new devices that are coming onto the market. What is, like, as an example, I think it's the UL that does a lot of the regulatory for these types of devices. How are they looking at product security regulations around building new products and being able to, buy them? Because that's the other problem. We can buy from China, we can buy from these countries that probably have no regulation, due to companies like Temu and Shein, and people are ordering that stuff, and they have no idea the vulnerabilities that could be built into these products, and they're getting them at a fraction of a cost. I don't know. How do you kind of address that problem?
So I would say I'm more focused on the enterprise side in terms of the threat, but I'll share with you that
Sure.
the regulatory governing teams, both in Europe and in America, are building this slowly but surely. You may see some protection acts around, hey, don't supply this IoT with a default password because nobody will change it and everybody could access it, right? That's a very, very simple method. So this is in America. In Europe, they have the GPDR as well as the NIST 2 and IS2 that talks about this security, the secure design of those IoTs, in terms of authentication, encryption, to build the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those assets because they are critical. Think about your cars. Since 2017, any one of your cars is an IoT, and it's getting more and more and more and more. And people can drive cars to a dam or into a wall. It's pretty cool to get your Tesla from the parking lot, but think about it if it can go somewhere else without your control. Hopefully, Mr. Musk is doing something about it. I'm quite sure he does. But think about anything else that is connected to the internet, and what are the implications if you lose its integrity or its availability, and what does it mean to your life, to your life safety?
I was going to ask you, Laurent, how are corporate companies looking at IoT in terms of like a challenge or opportunity or problem? Obviously as a consumer, we can talk about all of our discomforts all day about, the control you're giving out, but what are corporate companies doing, in 2025 in terms of, understanding the risk, understanding the problem, and then, what are they doing to solve it?
So this is a great question, I think, and I've been living through it in the last 5 years. It's like you have the two tribes. We call this, what the phenomenon that you're talking about from corporate perspective, it's called IT to OT convergence. If you've heard that terms before, what it means literally, it means that how do we take the processes and the techniques that we had in IT and apply them to OT? So what we are starting to see. So this was 5 years ago. The IT guys will do this stuff and the OT guys would say, dude, it works, don't touch it. Very simple. And
Just
then
don't scan it.
yeah, yeah. My pipeline is working, is fine. Don't touch it. Yes, it's connected to the internet because I need to see it's a situation over there. Colonial Pipeline came into situation, and two executive orders from Joe Biden came about. Okay, TSA 21 SD, and what they are talking about. You need to monitor this thing. You need to make sure that it's in a specific hygiene level. So what we are starting to see right now in the last 2 or 3 years, the CISO come to us and say, guys, I was always taking care of the IT risk. Now I need to take care of the plants. What do I do with that? Educate me. And now the plants would say, okay, you need to monitor us perfect. What do you need? And then you start seeing this. Are you going to impact my availability? Are you going to impact my production?
Mm.
And how do we? So there is a balancing act that I see coming right now in corporates to realize that this is something that is important to us. And by the way, yes, I mentioned manufacturing and plants, but there are plenty of verticals. If you'll take telecommunications, they have their consumer side and they have their back office. Same thing. Or if you take financials, they are going through digital transformation. I'm quite sure that when you go to the bank, you don't just go anymore. You schedule a meeting. It's all, they have digital signage that helps you. Where is your guy, right? Think about all of those things that has what we refer to CPS, cyber physical systems. All of them has to be accounted for from our perspective. So I hope I answered your question, but it's a very task for organizations.
Yeah, just to add to it as well, we've had a few engagements where we've helped clients kind of build out more of a security program around OT as well. And, to your point, it's interesting because it's not technology that we're solving, right? It's trying to raise awareness around, how to build, good programs, have accountability, right? So, you mentioned the CISO is becoming more responsible for the risk. But then who is the owner of these products, right? On the IT side, you generally have a CIO, a CTO, or, someone in that, hierarchy that owns it, where generally, in the OT space, you don't. You have some non-technical person that might be responsible, like a, general manager for that plant that is accountable. They have no idea how to, build a program to maintain technology, right? In this way. So, it's interesting, it does start with ownership from what we're seeing as well. And then it's from the basics, like, where's your asset inventory? What devices are they? Let's write them down. Let's figure out, what versions they're on. Let's look at the manufacturer and see, are there patches available or when did they stop patching them? Are they segmented away from your IT networks, right? Are they on their own networks or are they mixed, right? Are they accessible, right? It's all the basics you would expect, on this IT security side, now bringing those principles and applying them to OT, right? With, the same logic, really.
Absolutely.
Do you see, Liran, like as you look at different industries and the way they use operational technology, which are the industries you notice are kind of more, whether that be maybe behind in regards to advancing in their way of thinking about how to converge these together and mitigate risk? Which industries, I guess, is what I'm asking is like, do you find are the most vulnerable?
That's a tough rating because the sophisticated guys, the money guys, the bankers out there, everybody else. But they are the most targeted one. So one of my customers tells us that in a month there are 430 billion attacks attempts on it. And we are protecting a part of it. It's the numbers are, but the financials are, I would say, they are very educated. They understand the risk and I can see that they are starting to pay attention to that extended attack surface. Now, when you look into other verticals, let's pick on healthcare. To be a CISO in healthcare, I think if you want a challenge as a CISO, pick in healthcare as a vertical. Because look at what they have. They have IT, they have cloud, they have IoT, and they have the FDA that regulates what you can do with those devices, when you can patch them, who can patch them, how long, what is the life cycle. When you buy an MRI for $10 million, it's not going to die after 2 or 3 years. It may live there for 10 or 15 years. So healthcare, I think they are understaffed in terms of the cybersecurity people that they need in order to maintain this attack surface. And on the other end, they have every type of device you can imagine. The doors, the pneumatic doors, the pneumatic tunnels that move prescriptions from one floor to the other, and medical equipment roaming around your hospital. It's a very, very challenging environment. So they are, again, getting there. They have the HIPAA, which is a one sentence regulatory requirement, and they have iTrust but again, it's a checkbox kind of audit, but you are starting to see this IT to OT convergence. It's much stronger in healthcare than in other verticals like manufacturing. They're a little bit ahead of manufacturing per se.
And it's interesting because, you're only going to have more IoT devices in healthcare, right? You're going to be wearing a bunch of them probably in the next 5 to 10 years, even, more general people, right? As technology evolves, converges with AI, why would we not have more of these things on us, right?
It's even more like right now with telemedicine. Think about, you don't need to go to the hospital. Your iPhone can take your ECG and tell you what the situation is as of today. This is a technology that is available. Ramin, going back to your point that people do not realize that the technology is there, the risk is there. How do we account for it? How do we measure it? And how do we get better with time and not being surprised?
Liran, what kind of attacks, what are, you talked about kind of the technology and the risk, especially on the corporate side, like where are the attacks today and where are they going? Like, where's the evolution of the attacks, going, the bad actors going?
So there are two major threat actors. You see the geopolitical situation between America, Russia, China, and other parts of the world. Unfortunately, we don't have a shortage of geopolitical situation. All of those is absolutely reflection into cyber. And for example, and I'll mention few known attacks on critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is the most vulnerable environment right now. There are few typhoons. One of them is very famous. It's Salt Typhoon, which means, again, sponsored by the Chinese, in order to see it in our routers, in our VPN concentrators. And you can see it all the vendors like Cisco, Palo, Ivanti, Fortinet, all of them has multiple vulnerabilities because it was targeted. Because you need a device that always sits on the network and you don't think about this attack surface and you do nothing about this attack surface. And what they did with South Typhoon, they built the vulnerability that they can sit and listen and run malware on your router, on your VPN concentrator. With that, right now, what they're saying, they're snooping the data. So they would take even encrypted data, and they're waiting for quantum to take this old data and make it readable for them in a couple of years when quantum computing would be ready. So that critical infrastructure, absolutely. And any corporate has critical infrastructure. Yes, critical infrastructure is your TSA, your DOT, all of your federal government, your agencies, right? Absolutely important. Telecom is critical. Oil and gas, it's critical. Utilities are critical infrastructure. And they have regulations like NERC-CIP, for example. But is it up to meet the needs for the attack surface or the need for the sophistication and the minor attack techniques that are being using now? My answer to that, no. You need to go above and beyond SIP in order to get there. And this is
with
utilities, the light bulb, the electricity that you have running through your systems today.
Yeah. A lot of the attacks that we see with like IT systems these days are all pointed towards ransomware, right? That's kind of like where the goal is. What is it with OT? With OT, you're not able to, do the same thing. What is it that they can do once they get like a foothold or something like that?
The number one is safety and availability. This is where you see attacks on the OT. How can I take you down? Take your production down, take your eyes down, because look at us. We are all in different states talking to each other. We take it for granted. Think about it. I don't have electricity. I don't have internet. Those are two critical infrastructure environments, right? If I put that in a question mark underneath it, my life would not be as simple. Working remotely would not be in existence if critical infrastructure is hampered. And that
It
so
sounds like
that's
it's more primarily around.
sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna say. So it sounds like it's primarily more around like damage, right? Like if there is some kind of use case where the bad actor could potentially use, that infrastructure to create harm or change some kind of outcome. Those are more sophisticated, right? Those are attacks where it almost makes me think of like the Israel pager attack, right? Like that was something where years in planning had gone on. They had implemented their own kind of hardware into those, and then years later they had control and they could have been probably listening on those devices as well. They decided to take action, so it's more a longer game as well.
Yeah, I agree. But I would say that on the contrary, although it requires a very targeted effort and state-sponsored attackers, on the other hand, the critical infrastructure that they are going after is decades behind what you think about cybersecurity compensating controls. Most of those devices do not have authentication. Most of the passwords that are being used to attack critical infrastructure are admin 12345 6 as a password. That's 70% of the attacks. When was the last time you put such a password in your environment without MFA? MFA does not exist in critical infrastructure, in OT, for example.
Oh.
So, although it's very sophisticated, on the other end, it's very, very soft. And that's what we need to monitor first. And then when we can fix, like secure remote access is a solution for critical infrastructure. You don't use RDP anymore, you would use something else in order to keep that critical infrastructure that doesn't have MFA, that has user admin 123456 hard coded into the system that you can never change. This is the reality in that space. It's going back in time by at least a generation, if you ask me.
So you mentioned one of the solutions. That's what I wanted to kind of hit on as we kind of near the end of the episode here. Is what are some of the solutions to, because you've really stated some truly big problems. What are some of the things that we're doing to chip away at this problem, and some of the solutions you're seeing being offered to corporate customers?
So I would throw through bombs at you in a second, a few words that you may not heard before. But
Okay.
the answer is yes. So first of all, and Ramin, you touched it. Asset inventory. One,
Yeah.
understand what you have. Figure out what
Mhm.
the sandbox is. That's number one. Then
Mm.
go after vulnerabilities. What are the weaknesses you have in your environment? Who is attacking them? And what you can do about it. So for asset inventory and visibility into vulnerabilities, there are several technologies that are available today, and they are a part of regulatory. I mentioned SIPT. There are several other regulatory that are focused on, for example, TSA 21 and ISA 62443 that talks about those segmenting them in order to containerize the risk. I have here what we refer to Purdue model that says you with 5 layers of assets and the type of assets. Make sure that you have conduits between them. You have segmentation. They don't talk to each other out of control, right? And a third thing about it is to understand the firmware. And there is an SBOM, which is software bill of material, okay? That what it does, takes this firmware, analyze it, tell you what the libraries, the open source libraries you use, or the custom code that you've built into it, and tell you where the vulnerabilities are. And by that, you when you buy an MRI machine, it would come with an SBOM. I'm running Apache server, I'm running Windows 11, etc., etc. And this is what puts the ingredients into this, what we call an IOMT or an OT device. So those are two emerging technologies that we are seeing, or I would call it regulatory and technologies that would allow you to digest your attack surface, understand what you can do about it, and take remediation action or compensating control. If it's a firewall for segmentation, if it's an IPS for vulnerability, or if you can patch it or have a new firmware, that's even better.
Where do you see this going with AI, whether it's on the the way we secure these devices, or where the just adoption of IoT will just significantly increase. Like,
So
where do you see this going in 10 years?
So where I see AI plays a major role is, first of all, getting all the contextual information. Think about an asset. I'll give you an example. Any one of your routers has about 1,400 router. I'm talking about the Linksys router that you have at home. Has about 1,400 on average, 1,400 software components. Now, each one of them has vulnerabilities and a date and a firmware. It's really hard to say, okay, you need to do this and this and this. It's much more complicated. So where I see AI take a big data lake of your asset inventory and gives you priorities on what you need to take first and what you need to take second. And from where it's going, if you ask me, so AI could give you a better contextual visibility into what is going on by analyzing the big data information, the data lake, and pointing you to the weakest links. Where I think it's going into predictive cybersecurity. I would take all of your assets, all of your vulnerabilities, and compound the threats around it, all the actors, and tell you, hey, I know that this is CVSS 9.8, but no actor is looking into it right now. Focus on this IoT device that sits always on the internet because it needs cloud access to function.
Do you see like more action being in the space as well? Like, for example, imagine I subscribe to this AI that locks my IoT down, and not only does it identify, but it'll take preventative actions as well, change that admin password, patch it on its own, do some basic stuff like that so that even the consumer or user does not have to be in the loop. Do you see that as a possibility?
I see it's coming, but not right now. In the next 2 or 3 years, we will see more maturity around it, especially in critical infrastructure, when, remember, availability is the number one thing. Although I changed this password, and now no one can access it, now I lost availability to a critical device. So we need to balance this to what we are doing right now is giving you suggestions and prioritization. I think the next level is to take more rudimentary compensating controls.
I mean, I think that's where the opportunity is, because there's just too many devices for humans to be in the loop to do, right? Whether it's manual or even, you're going to write technology, you have so many different types of devices. So it's going to be hard to do anything universal or, even be able to manage those devices. So, with AI, I could see, the use case for it taking action, but then you just scared me with saying, well, what if it locks you out of your device and you can no longer get into that, right?
Yeah.
Right? There are going to be risks that, have to be accepted as well.
Exactly. Absolutely.
You can ask the final question. I was going to say we're kind of getting to the end here, but last question. I'll let you go for it, Rami.
What advice would you give companies? I'm sure you've seen the pattern repeat itself over and over again, just like we do when we engage with someone, right? What advice would you give for someone that wants to raise awareness, that wants to do more in this space? What's a good approach that they can take with their executives, with their boards, to raise awareness and to be able to invest in, securing these devices?
You're going to be surprised for my answer, but I'll say go back to the basics. There is not a silver bullet. I think I've heard it like 15 years ago. But when you look into an asset, make sure that you know all of your assets. Make sure that you know all of the firmware and vulnerabilities. Know who is after you. And those magic bullets like, hey, let's put a bubble around it. Let's shrink wrap this thing. Don't be on the internet. There's no such a thing, don't be on the internet. So I would say go back to the basics, which in terms of understand your overall attack surface. And there is not a silver bullet. It's a process, a maturity model that you would need to grow with. If you look into zero trust, everybody talks about zero trust. It's a journey. There is not a zero trust product you can buy today and put it in. So when you talk about IoT and unmanaged, the magnitude of efforts you would need to put are much higher. So take it to the basics. Figure out the assets and the vulnerabilities.
I like that, right? It's very practical. And anytime, you ever doing anything, especially from the lens of cybersecurity, you start by measuring, right? So once you identify your assets, you're measuring your risk. Now you have something to communicate to your peers, to your board, to your investors. And then from there, you come up with, is it an assessment? Is it, what kind of investment, what kind of strategy to, protect you from that? So I think that's very practical.
The last thing I would say is work with your counterparts. Like if you're in manufacturing, pick up on the CISO for manufacturing. Say, what are you doing? What are you doing? Work with the community, because alone it's
Collaborate for sure. Communicate. It's just simple stuff, like you said, the basics. But many companies are not doing that. They get caught up in their own little world and they're not spending the time, the effort to get that additional context. So that seems to be critical. No pun intended. Well, Liran, thanks so much for joining us on our show. This was a fascinating conversation on hopefully those that are listening, especially those that are adjacent to any kind of critical or OT infrastructure in their environment, can take some lessons here and really start taking action to protect us all, right? I mean, we all utilize these systems and services on a regular basis. So let's continue to work together to keep our future secure. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Laurent.
Bye-bye.